Unaware she was pregnant and heir to the kingdom's wealth, the mistress pushed the Duchess down the stairs. The night of the spring gala at Drayford Castle was supposed to be a celebration of unity, wealth, and noble alliances. Instead, it became the night the kingdom witnessed the quiet destruction of a woman no one bothered to notice. Lady Elowen Ravenshire, Duchess of Drayford. The golden banners above the hall fluttered gently with the breeze. Musicians played lively strings, and nobles paraded through the room dripping in jewels and arrogance. Yet among all the noise and glitter, Elowen stood alone near a marble pillar, her hands resting softly over her stomach, as if instinctively protecting the child growing inside her. No one knew she was pregnant, not even the father, not even the Duke. Her husband, Alistair Drayford, was the kind of man whose charm crumbled the moment one looked too closely. He was handsome, yes. Powerful, yes. But his heart was a hollow chamber, one filled only with ambition and pride. He hadn't touched Elowen in weeks, hadn't spoken a word of affection in months, and had never once asked if she was happy or safe. Instead, he spent every waking moment with his mistress. Lady Selene Farbridge, the woman who walked into a room like a blade, sharp, cold, and always aiming to cut something. Tonight, she aimed for Elowen. Colleen swept toward the Duchess like a storm made of silk and venom. Her gown, crimson like spilled blood, shimmered under the chandelier. She clung to the Duke's arm as if she had already replaced the wife he ignored. "Elowen," Colleen purred, offering a smile polished with malice. "Standing all alone again? You must be used to it by now." A small ripple of laughter passed through the nobles nearby. Elowen did not lift her gaze. The Duke sighed, as if embarrassed by the woman who bore his name. "Try not to cause scenes, Elowen," he said under his breath. "You know how fragile your nerves are." Fragile. A word he used every time he wanted her to shut her mouth. Elowen breathed slowly, forcing the tremor down. She had endured this for months. The whispers, the ridicule, the humiliation disguised as playful banter, but lately, something felt heavier, darker. And tonight, she could no longer ignore the danger. Selene stepped closer, her voice now a whisper meant only for Elowen. "You really should walk away from him, my dear," she said, her smile sharpening. "Once the inheritance case is settled, and he becomes sole lord of these lands, he will no longer need you." Elowen's breath caught. "Inheritance case?" Selene blinked and smirked. "Oh, you didn't know?" The world around Elowen blurred. The hall, the music, the laughter, everything faded. Her mother's estate, her mother's wealth, the case pending in the capital. Selene knew something she didn't. Her heartbeat quickened. She pressed a hand to her stomach. She needed air. She turned and walked away from the hall, her steps unsteady. But Selene followed her like a predator stalking wounded prey. "Leaving already?" Selene called, loud enough that nobles turned to watch them. "Running away does suit you." Elowen felt heat behind her eyes. She didn't want to cry. Not here. She made her way toward the grand staircase, the one that spiraled down toward the lower halls. Selene's heels clicked behind her. Closer. Closer. "Elowen," she called softly. "I should thank you, actually." Elowen paused at the top of the stairs, her hand gripping the rail. "For what?" she whispered. "For being so easy to erase." A hand struck her shoulder. Elowen gasped. The push came quick, vicious, calculated. Her foot slipped. Her balance vanished. The world tilted violently, but instinct, or perhaps the tiny heartbeat inside her, forced her arm to cling desperately to the railing. She twisted, slid, crashed onto the stone steps, her vision flashing white. Gasps erupted in the hall. The music stopped. The world froze. Selene stood at the top of the staircase, eyes wide, not with guilt, but with frustration. The Duchess had survived. "Elowen," a few nobles cried, rushing to help her. The Duke arrived moments later, face twisted not with concern, but irritation. "What were you doing?" he snapped. "Did you trip again?" Elowen tried to speak, but pain constricted her breath. The castle physician pushed through the crowd. "Move aside," he ordered. He knelt beside her, examining her injuries. Then he pressed a hand to her lower abdomen. "Elowen," he whispered urgently. "My lady, do you feel any pain here?" Her eyes widened. "Yes." He looked up, voice trembling. "My lord, she is not only injured, she is with child." The hall erupted. The Duke froze. Celine's face drained of blood. Nobles stared, servants whispered, and Elowen, still lying on the staircase, finally understood. Tonight, everything would change. Not because of the fall, not because of the pregnancy, but because this child, and the inheritance her mother had left her, made Elowen Ravenshire one of the most invaluable women in the realm. And the people who tried to break her were about to regret everything. The hall that once echoed with laughter now buzzed with a deeper, sharper sound. Panic. Shocked whispers spread like wildfire as the news hit every noble ear. The Duchess is pregnant, and immediately after, the Duchess is the sole heir of the Ravenshire fortune. For years, the court had treated Elowen as an afterthought, a decoration beside the Duke, a quiet woman who lingered at the edge of gatherings and spoke only when spoken to. But now she had become the center of the kingdom's most dangerous equation. Wealth, heir, power, the three things that shaped empires. The physician helped her into a private chamber, his hands trembling as he placed cushions behind her back. "My lady, you must remain still," he urged. "The fall was severe, but the child seems unharmed for now." Elowen let out a shaky breath, one hand protectively covering her stomach. Child. Her child. A child created in a marriage of indifference, but still hers. A life worth more than any insult or cruelty she had endured. Outside the chamber, footsteps stormed in. The Duke arrived, his expression contorted not with concern, but calculation. "Elowen," he said sharply, "you should have told me." She looked up, weary and confused. "Told you what?" "That you were with child," he snapped. "What were you thinking? Concealing something like this?" She almost laughed at the absurdity. "You have not spoken a word to me in weeks. When exactly should I have told you?" His jaw clenched. Behind him, Celine appeared, her face pale as ash. "Elowen," the mistress said softly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so glad you're all right. It must have been such a frightful accident." Elowen's eyes sharpened. "An accident?" Celine froze, for the first time since the push. "Yes," Celine said quickly. "Of course. You must have slipped." Elowen held her gaze, silent, steady, unblinking. Celine faltered. Before anyone could speak again, heavy boots echoed through the corridor. A procession of royal messengers entered, bearing scrolls sealed with the king's crest. They bowed. "Duke Dreyford," the lead messenger announced. "We carry legal documents regarding the inheritance of Lady Elowen Ravenshire." Celine's lips parted in shock. "What inheritance?" the Duke asked slowly. The messenger stepped forward, unrolling a thick parchment. "By decree of the High Court of the capital, the estate of the late Marchioness Elowen Ravenshire has been officially awarded to her daughter, Lady Elowen Ravenshire." He read down the list of holdings. Ravenshire gold mines, 3 eastern spice routes, ownership of the largest trade port in the kingdom, rights to 5 merchant fleets, 37 aristocratic estates, private coffers holding more gold than the royal treasury itself. The Duke staggered backward. Celine gasped, nearly collapsing, Elowen's heart raced in her chest. She had known her mother came from wealth. But this was an empire. And furthermore, the messenger continued, all income, influence, and rights associated with the Ravenshire legacy now belong solely to the Duchess. The silence that followed was suffocating. The Duke's face drained of every drop of color. Celine trembled, her hands clutching her gown. Elowen sat upright, stunned by the magnitude of the revelation. Her entire life she had believed she possessed nothing that mattered. Now she understood why her mother's estate had taken so long to finalize. This was not a mere inheritance. It was a kingdom within a kingdom. The messenger bowed again. "We await your signature, my lady." Elowen reached for the quill with hands steadier than she expected, and signed. The Duke swallowed hard. "Elowen, this changes everything." She looked at him quietly. "It changes what you thought of me, not who I am." Before he could answer, murmurs rose from the corridor. Nobles were gathering, whispering, "She's richer than the Duke. She's richer than half the lords. She's pregnant with the heir. She doesn't need him anymore. She could leave him and rise higher." Celine stepped closer to Dreyford, panic twisting her perfect features. "Alistair, what does this mean for us?" Elowen spoke before he could. "It means," she said calmly, "that the woman you pushed tonight is not the victim you imagined." Celine flinched. Elowen continued, "It means that your cruelty now has consequences." The door opened again, and a royal officer stepped inside. "By order of the king," he announced, "Lady Elowen Ravenshire is requested at the capital immediately to discuss her new economic authority." The Duke took a step forward. "She cannot go alone. She is my wife." "She answers to the crown," the officer replied, "not to you." Elowen rose slowly, supported by the physician. And for the first time in her life, everyone in the room looked up at her, not down. She walked past the Duke, past Celine, past the hall of nobles who once laughed at her. She did not look back. And the Duke, the mistress, and the court realized one horrifying truth. They hadn't just mistreated a quiet woman. They had awakened the most powerful force in the kingdom. The journey to the capital should have been exhausting. Elowen was bruised, shaken, and carrying a child whose heartbeat she prayed was still steady. Yet as her carriage approached the towering white walls of Eldenfell, she felt something she had not felt in months. Strength, not loud, not vengeful, but steady, like the hum of a storm gathering far beyond the horizon. At the city gates, people stopped what they were doing. Merchants halted mid-bargain, children stood on tiptoe, and soldiers straightened their backs at the sight of the royal escort. Whispers rose and folded into each other. "That's her, the Ravenshire heiress. The woman the Duke ignored. She survived the fall? They say she owns the gold mines. They say she carries the heir." Elowen kept her gaze forward, not proud, but no longer small. Inside the palace, the royal steward led her through halls carved with marble and sunlight. "The king awaits, my lady." Before she could steady her breath, the doors to the royal council chamber swung open. Inside were men who shaped the realm, generals, treasurers, lords of old families. But they were not the ones who struck Elowen with awe. It was King Athelmere IV, rising from his throne as she entered. "Lady Elowen Ravenshire," he said, his tone formal yet unexpectedly warm. "It is an honor." She bowed deeply. "Your Majesty." The king studied her, her calm posture despite the fresh bruise on her arm, the quiet fire in her eyes, the almost invisible tremble of a woman standing after a lifetime of being pushed down. "You look like a woman who has endured more than she says," he murmured, "and more than most could withstand." Elowen did not deny it. He gestured toward the council table, where the parchment detailing her inheritance lay open. "You are aware," he said. that you now control wealth and influence enough to shift the balance of the entire kingdom. Elowen swallowed. I learned only hours ago, Your Majesty. He exchanged a glance with Lord Winthor, the kingdom's chief financial advisor. We have long awaited the rightful heir, Winthor said, nodding respectfully. Your mother was remarkable. And you, my lady, stand at the threshold of the same path. Elowen's heart twisted at the mention of her mother, the woman who taught her kindness, silence, dignity, and unknowingly prepared her for a world that would reward none of those traits. The estate is vast, Winthor continued, and its influence greater than the Duke ever realized. If you wish it, you may take a seat among the crown's highest economic counselors. Elowen blinked. A place reserved for the kingdom's most powerful minds, offered to her. Her voice faltered. I don't know if The king raised a hand. You do not need confidence to be worthy. You only need truth. He motioned for her to approach the table. As she stepped forward, the parchment maps revealed the scope of her empire. Red lines marking trade routes, gold marks showing mines, blue for ports, green for spice paths. It looked less like an inheritance, and more like the map of another kingdom. Her kingdom. If you accept, the king said quietly, you will have the authority to audit any noble house, override any unfair tariff, and examine any financial corruption, including, if necessary, within your own husband's estate. The room stilled. Elowen's fingers tightened against her stomach. She understood then. This was not simply an appointment. It was liberation. I accept, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. The king smiled, not with triumph, but with respect. Then rise as Lady Elowen Ravenshire, Royal Trade Conservator. A title that echoed through the hall like a bell announcing the dawn of a new era. The first blow to the Duke. While Elowen was introduced to her new offices inside the palace, elegant chambers overlooking the bustling harbor, messengers rushed back to Drayford Castle, carrying a decree with the royal seal. Duke Alistair tore it open, expecting reassurance. Instead, he read, all maritime operations associated with House Drayford are hereby frozen, pending audit by the Royal Trade Conservator, Lady Elowen Ravenshire. The letter slipped from his grip. Frozen? He whispered. By Elowen. Celine snatched the parchment, eyes wide with outrage. She did this! She's punishing you. Get her under control before she... He exploded. She is no longer under my control. Celine stumbled back, startled by the rage in his voice. She answers to the crown now, he said bitterly. And the crown listens to her. What are we going to do? Celine hissed. Drayford sank into his chair, staring at the trembling candle flame. I don't know, he whispered, but we are no longer the hunters. The first steps of power. That evening, as Elowen reviewed ledgers and trade disputes, her new assistant knocked. My lady, he said softly. Word is spreading. The nobles are unsettled. Elowen looked up from her desk. Unsettled? Fearful, he corrected. They know you can see everything now. Every secret dealing, every false report, every theft. Elowen felt no satisfaction, just clarity. She placed a hand over her stomach. I will not use this position for vengeance, she said, but then her tone sharpened. I will use it for justice. The assistant bowed. Outside her window, the harbor torches flickered like stars, and far away, in a castle that once felt like a prison, the Duke felt the first tremor of a fall he could not escape. Back in Drayford Castle, the shadows grew longer by the hour. The once bustling halls felt hollow, servants whispering behind doors, merchants hesitating at the gates, and nobles quietly withdrawing their alliances. It all began with the first decree, then the second, then the third. Every morning, Duke Alastair awoke to another royal notice stamped with the same name, Lady Elowen Ravenshire, Royal Trade Conservator. And each decree chipped away at the foundations of his estate. The spice caravans he depended on were halted. The port taxes he had evaded for years were recalculated. The debts he had hidden were exposed, in elegant handwriting. Celine paced the length of his study like a caged panther. "This is her revenge," she hissed, slamming a scroll onto his desk. "She's humiliating you. You must do something." "She is not humiliating me," Alastair muttered, rubbing his temples. "She is doing her job." Celine whirled around. "You defend her now?" The Duke slumped into his chair, exhaustion carving lines into his face. "I don't defend her," he said quietly. "I am acknowledging that she holds more power than we assumed." Celine's expression tightened, the same expression she wore the night she pushed Elowen down the stairs. "So what now?" she snapped. "Will you grovel? Beg her to stop?" The Duke didn't answer, because deep inside, he realized the truth. He had married Elowen for her connection to the Ravenshire name. He had treated her with indifference, then disdain. He had allowed Celine to torment her. He had ignored the woman who had now become the most influential figure in the kingdom. And now he was losing everything. The court turns against him. Word of the inheritance revelation spread quickly. Nobles who once laughed at Elowen now whispered behind fans and goblets, "She has more authority than the Duke himself. She can ruin him with a signature. She isn't the quiet girl we thought she was." Worse than whispers were the invitations, or rather, their absence. Banquets, councils, military meetings. The Duke received none of them. One evening, after a long day of financial blows, he confronted his steward. "Why have I not been summoned to the King's Spring Tribunal?" The steward bowed his head. "My lord, the tribunal has asked for Lady Elowen, only Lady Elowen." Alastair's jaw locked. "And does the king ask for me at all?" The steward hesitated, a dangerous thing. "No, my lord." It was official. Alastair Drayford, Duke of one of the oldest houses in the kingdom, was now considered less relevant than the wife he had dismissed. Meanwhile, in the capital, Elowen flourished. Her private chambers were transformed into a powerful economic office overlooking the sea. Ledgers stacked in neat piles, maps pinned across the walls, and the quiet hum of clerks working under her guidance. She approached each task not with fury, but with a calm, relentless precision. Corrupt tariffs, reworked, unfair contracts affecting villages, reversed, trade disputes lingering for years, settled in days. Nobles who once ignored her now waited outside her door for hours, rehearsing their flattery, desperate for her approval. She treated them with polite distance, never cruel, but never soft. Her influence grew until even the king relied on her judgment for matters of commerce. And yet, she remained humble. She walked the palace gardens in the late afternoons, one hand always resting on her stomach, feeling the rhythmic flutter that reminded her of her purpose. The baby was strong, alive, growing. It was this child that had opened her eyes. It was this child that had given her courage. It was this child that had survived the fall she never should have endured. Sometimes, late at night, she whispered, "I will give you a life better than mine." Celine begins to break. While Elowen rose, Celine began to unravel. She watched the Duke crumble, watched his influence shrink, his temper sharpen, his anxiety grow. She hated seeing him weakened, not because she loved him, but because his downfall meant her downfall. "Elowen is destroying us," Celine repeated daily, nails biting into her palms. "You must be rid of her." Alastair glared at her, finally seeing the venom behind her beauty. "She is the mother of my child," he said coldly. Celine's face twisted. "And I would have been too if you hadn't." He cut her off with a cold stare. Silence. The truth hung between them like a blade. Celine had wanted a title, not a family. Alistair had wanted status, not a wife. Elowen had gained both, without wanting either. Celine trembled with rage. "I should have pushed her harder," she hissed under her breath. Alistair's eyes snapped toward her. "What did you just say?" But Celine, realizing her slip, forced a smile. "Nothing, darling. Just emotion." For the first time, disgust flickered in his expression. Elowen's moral choice. The king requested her presence in the palace atrium. "Elowen," he said, "you have grounds to imprison your husband and his mistress. Attempted murder is not a trivial matter." The council murmured agreement. Elowen stood tall, her voice steady. "I do not wish to imprison him, Your Majesty." The council looked stunned. The king studied her. "May I ask why?" he said softly. "Because jail is punishment," she said. "And what I want is not punishment. What I want is freedom." "Freedom? Mine," she said. "And my child's." Her hand touched her stomach. "I want a divorce." The hall fell silent. The king nodded slowly, respect deepening in his eyes. "You shall have it." And with that, Elowen Ravenshire stepped beyond the shadow of the Duke forever. What she didn't know was that her request would trigger the final and most devastating chapter of the Duke's collapse. The official divorce summons arrived at Drayford Castle at dawn. The messenger handed it to the Duke with a stiff bow, his eyes avoiding direct contact, a sign that even the palace staff now carried more authority than the disgraced noble before them. Alistair broke the wax seal with shaking fingers. "By decree of the Crown, Lady Elowen Ravenshire petitions for the dissolution of marriage on grounds of neglect, endangerment, and breach of noble duty." His breath caught. "The petition is granted." The paper slipped from his hands and fell to the floor. It was over. His title still existed, but his marriage, the alliance that had secured his place among the great houses, was gone. His future heir, the child he had never cherished, now belonged solely to Elowen. Her estate no longer bolstered his, and he could feel the walls closing in. The last attempt to control what he lost. Hours later, the Duke saddled his horse, alone. Celine demanded to follow him, but he silenced her with a glare so cold even she dared not argue. He galloped toward the capital with desperation clouding his judgment, ignoring the warnings of guards, ignoring the storm clouds gathering above. By the time he reached the palace gates, he looked like a man who had been swallowed by grief and spit back out. "I must speak with Lady Elowen," he called. The guards exchanged looks. "My lord," one said carefully, "Lady Elowen does not receive uninvited guests." Alistair clenched his fists. "I am her husband." The guard's gaze hardened. "Not anymore." The words hit him harder than any physical blow. "Tell her I am here," he insisted, voice breaking. "I beg of you." The guard left, returning moments later with a clear message. "Lady Elowen declines." Alistair stumbled back. Declines. A word the Duke had heard applied to petitions, requests, and proposals, never to himself. He stood outside the gates for nearly an hour, waiting, hoping, praying she would change her mind. She did not. At last, the palace bells rang, signaling the noon council session. And he saw her. Elowen Ravenshire, walking with slow, dignified steps, surrounded by royal advisors, her hand resting gently over her stomach. Her hair was braided back with silver threads, her gown flowing like water, her expression serene, untouchable. She didn't look toward the gate, not even once. She didn't need to. The message was already clear. She owed him nothing, not an explanation, not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement. And that was the moment the Duke broke. The mistress faces her judgment. While the Duke's humiliation unfolded at the gates, Celine Farbridge faced a reckoning of her own. A royal summons had been delivered to her that morning. She assumed it was for an audience with Elowen or the king. It was neither. When she arrived at the court hall, 2 guards stepped forward. "Lady Celine Farbridge," the herald called, "you stand accused of attempted murder of the Duchess of Drayford, heir to the Ravenshire fortune, and bearer of the kingdom's noble heir." Celine froze. The court whispered. Her lips parted. That fall was an accident. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Multiple witnesses saw you following the Duchess. One saw you place your hand upon her back." Celine's face drained of color. "You have no proof—" "Her bruise," the prosecutor cut in, "matched the shape of your ring." Celine's hand flew to her fingers, the large ruby ring she wore to every gala. She felt dizzy. "No," she whispered. "No, you cannot—" A guard seized her arm. "You are hereby sentenced to confinement pending final trial." Celine screamed, a raw, animalistic sound, as she was dragged away. Her desperation echoed down the stone corridor. She called for Alistair, for mercy, for help, but no one came, and no one ever would. Elowen's triumph and the kingdom's new era. By the time Celine was locked away and the Duke's attempts to reach Elowen failed, the royal council was already gathering. Elowen entered the chamber flanked by advisors and scholars. Her presence commanded a respect that no gold could buy. The king rose. "Lady Ravenshire," he began, "your reforms have stabilized the realm's finances, exposed corruption, and protected thousands of commoners from exploitation. The council recognizes your exceptional service." He lifted a royal decree. "It is my honor to appoint you High Trade Regent, an office answering only to the crown." The hall erupted. Elowen's heart raced, not from ambition, but from the realization that she had risen higher than anyone expected, including herself. She bowed. "I accept, Your Majesty." The king nodded, proud. "You represent the future, a future where strength comes not from birthright, but from integrity." Elowen's voice softened. "Thank you, Your Majesty. My child will inherit a world freer than the one I was born into." Her independence, sealed forever. Later that evening, Elowen returned to her chambers. She stood before the balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars fallen to earth. Her hand rested on her stomach, feeling the steady rhythm of new life. She had escaped a loveless marriage. She had survived an attempt on her life. She had reclaimed her mother's legacy. She had built her own power. And she had done it without hate, without violence, without becoming what they were. A knock sounded. Her assistant appeared with a message. "My lady, a final letter from the Duke." Elowen took it, opened it, read it. "I am sorry for everything, for not seeing who you were, for not seeing what we could have been. I know you will not return, nor should you. I only ask, one day, if our paths cross, that you look at me without hatred. I wish you a happier life than the one I gave you." Alistair Elowen folded the letter, placed it on her desk, and whispered, "I feel nothing toward you, and that is my peace." She extinguished the candle, letting darkness swallow the words forever. Months passed, and the kingdom shifted around Lady Elowen Ravenshire, as though adjusting itself to the presence of a new star. What had once been a quiet, overlooked duchess had transformed into one of the realm's most influential pillars, a force that moved with grace, precision, and unshakable resolve. Where others saw power as a crown, she wore hers like a whisper. The capital responded in kind. Merchants greeted her with bows deeper than those offered to generals. Villagers sent letters thanking her for reforms that protected their livelihoods. Nobles approached her carefully, aware that one wrong word could unravel the wealth they clung to. Elowen accepted none of the flattery, only responsibility. She spent her mornings reviewing merchant disputes, her afternoons overseeing trade laws, and her evenings walking through the palace gardens. Her hand always cradling her growing stomach, her eyes softened by a quiet hope she rarely allowed herself to feel. Despite the demands of her new life, peace wrapped itself around her like a gentle cloak. No cruelty, no humiliation, no more shadows lurking behind staircases, only freedom. The Duke's final collapse. Far from the capital, Drayford Castle crumbled in ways even time could not match. Without Elowen's estate to support it, the castle's wealth evaporated like morning mist. Debts soared. The once constant visits from nobles ceased entirely. Merchants, once eager to court Drayford's favor, now avoided the estate as though it carried a plague. Alistair sat alone in his study, staring at the dust collecting on ledgers he no longer had the authority to touch. The fall was not sudden. It was slow, deliberate, excruciating. A slow drowning. Servants quit. Allies vanished. His mistress was imprisoned. The man who once prided himself on dominance was reduced to a ghost within his own walls. One evening, he stood by the window, staring at the horizon. The capital's distant glow flickered like a memory he couldn't reach. He whispered Elowen's name, not out of love, but regret. Regret for what he had thrown away. Regret for the woman he never bothered to understand. Regret for the quiet strength he mistook for weakness. A strength that had risen higher than he ever would. Celine's fate. Celine Farbridge, once the most envied mistress of the nobility, now lived behind cold iron bars in a stone cell deep beneath the courthouse. She raged. She screamed. She swore the kingdom would collapse without her influence. No one listened. No one cared. Her trial was swift. Her sentence, lifelong banishment to a remote penitentiary monastery. A place where vanity, seduction, and pride meant nothing. A place where silence consumed the soul. Her fall was fitting. Not because it was cruel, but because it was the very life she had tried to force upon Elowen. Celine had once pushed a duchess down a staircase. Now the weight of her own sins pushed her into oblivion. The birth of a new legacy. On a golden summer morning, the palace echoed with hurried footsteps and excited whispers. The Duchess was in labor. The king himself sent his personal physician. Midwives rushed into her chambers. Servants lit candles and opened windows to let in the sunlight of a warm, promising day. The labor was long, hours of pain, sweat, and determination. Elowen gripped the sheets with trembling hands, her breath coming in sharp gasps. But her spirit did not falter. She had survived humiliation. She had survived betrayal. She had survived a fall meant to kill her. This would not break her. Finally, after a final desperate cry, the room filled with the sound of a newborn's first breath. A boy. Then, much to the shock of the midwives, another. Twins. Elowen cried as both babies were placed in her arms. One with hair as dark as night, the other with eyes bright like crystal. 2 lives, 2 miracles, 2 reasons to never look back. The king visited that evening. When he saw Elowen with her children, he bowed, a gesture that sent the palace into stunned silence. "These children," he said softly, "are heirs to a legacy stronger than any crown. They are born of resilience, and a mother who changed the kingdom." Elowen smiled faintly. Not proud, not triumphant, peaceful. The final letter the Duke never received. In Drayford Castle, a messenger arrived breathless. "My lord, the Duchess has given birth to twins." The Duke closed his eyes, tears burning behind them. Twins, his heirs, children he never held, children he never deserved. He wrote a letter, apology, sorrow, longing. But the messenger who delivered it to the capital returned days later. My lord, the Duchess refused the letter. The Duke's last hope dissolved. Some stories end in forgiveness. Hers did not, because forgiveness is a gift, and Elowen Ravenshire had given enough. Elowen's new era months later, Elowen strolled through the palace garden with her twins in her arms. Flowers bloomed in full glory, and sunlight danced through the leaves like golden blessings. She sat beneath the old willow tree, her favorite place, and whispered to her children, "You will grow in a world where no one will push you down, not while I breathe." Her assistant approached with documents, trade updates, petitions for her approval, invitations for council meetings. "My lady," he said, "the kingdom awaits your guidance." Elowen smiled down at her babies. Let them wait a moment longer. For the first time in her life, she lived on her own terms. No chains of marriage, no shadows of cruelty, no hands trying to push her down the stairs. Only sunlight, only peace, only the legacy of a woman who learned her worth and reshaped a kingdom with it. Her story did not end with revenge. Her story ended with freedom. And freedom, she knew now, was the greatest power of all.